Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the Care Table podcast, dedicated to educating and supporting family caregivers of aging loved ones. I'm your host, Amy Huddleston. Through insightful interviews from both industry experts and family caregivers, we aim to provide valuable perspectives and resources. Let's see who we're learning from today. Welcome to today's episode of the Care Table. Today, we're going to have a caregiving journey. Before we start, I just want to remind you, please hit that bell on YouTube to subscribe, leave a review. We appreciate your support. Today, we're going to interview a daughter, Kathy Trimble, about her caregiving journey, about her mother. We might talk about dad a little bit too. And she has a lot of incredible knowledge that she's going to share with us because this was quite a journey for her, but we're hoping that people listening can relate, can learn from her experiences. So Kathy, welcome. And I want to start first with just, let's talk about mom. Give us a high level of her diagnoses and also around what age she was when things started that you and any siblings had to get involved.
Okay. She did have advanced dementia. And she also had some other things. She had SVT, which is like a fast heartbeat, and she had wet macular degeneration. That occurred in her late 80s. She was 96 when she died, and she died on Christmas Eve of this past Christmas. And the wet macular degeneration, she would get injections in her eye. And then I would say around the age of 94, and I would go with her to these, the doctor said there was nothing he could do for the one eye. Now, what was interesting about that was just, so she would tell us she really couldn't see. It was blurry, and I'd get her new eyeglasses, and we went through all the magnifiers that you could possibly get. Magnifiers you put on the page, floor magnifiers. The doctor said how, because she loved to read and do sewing and craft projects. However, she would tell us that all she could really see is blurry, shadowy visions. But then there'd be times where it seemed like she would see something that even we didn't see when we were in the room. So we're like, what? So sometimes I thought maybe her dementia was part of that, because also when we were at the doctor, sometimes she could see things on the eye chart. But, and I think that, and the doctor told us at the end, he goes, I think some of this is the connection with the brain, affecting it. So do you want me to say how we knew when she finally had dementia?
Sure.
Okay. So, and I'll talk about this later, but obviously I think she had dementia, was going down the hill of dementia before this. However, we didn't know. The doctors were not doing a routine cognitive test on her. But she was really good until she turned 94. She was amazing. She was a partner in a business with my dad, Houston Auto Service, and she was a part-time bookkeeper and co-owner of the business. And she worked down there till she was 94. We laugh because the Thanksgiving, she would come up here with my nephew. And right before she turned 94, we were laughing because she was up here with my nephew and they were sitting on the couch, and she, motioned to him and said, we need to get going, because they had to go back to Pittsburgh. And she goes, I got to work in the morning. And we all just died. We thought that was so funny. But unfortunately, when she turned 94, she started going downhill. It started with her telling me she was having all this pressure and all these eye problems. So we thought it was related to the eye vision problems she was having, or dry eye, something of that nature. She went through a bunch of testing and everything, and they said, no, there's nothing. So, my sister-in-law is a nurse, so she would come and she would do things. We also thought maybe it was dehydration. My sister-in-law knew somebody that did those, those IV hydrations, and they would come to the house and do that. We were thinking, we had an MRI, CAT scan, and, thinking what's going on. Then all of a sudden, a couple months after that, she starts with these delusions of burglars breaking into her house. My one brother and sister-in-law live right next door. And So that was good. But she kept saying they were breaking in her house. She didn't hear them and she didn't see them, but she would tell me, Kathy, they were here. They took my plates in the kitchen and they put them in the cupboard upside down. Or look at what they did to all my clothes. They just scattered them everywhere. So she was and so we tried everything because I talked to a counselor and they said, because my oldest brother tried to reason with her and she got really mad at him. And when I would talk to a counselor, he said, you have to kind of go with it to some degree, or she's going to wrap you into this paranoia. Like you're part of the conspiracy. So we got a video camera from my brother's house to, because she thought they were getting in the garage door. We had a remote at the garage door that people couldn't get in unless they had a code. We changed all the locks. We put bells on the doors. And no matter what we did, somebody inevitably was getting in. My brothers, who both lived close to my mom, like I said, one lived next door, one lived about 5 minutes away, they would spend the night. And so I'd be like, okay, so that night went well. And she said, yes. But then I would talk to her later in the day. I lived in Ohio. She lived in Pennsylvania. And she would tell me, no, they came in. And I said, well, Larry spent the night with you. And she's like, well, he just didn't see it. So we knew something was wrong. So we first took her to the family doctor. He did a cognitive test on her. It was not good. And he said she's in advanced dementia. So we got her on Aricept. But he said with Aricept, it's not going to bring back her memories, but will help maybe slow it down. And she knew who we were, so that was good. And you could still have a conversation with you. She just had this paranoia. So I brought her up to my house like every other month for like 10 days to try to get her distracted off the burglars. She never completely forgot it, but was a little better at my house. But she was very much a homebody and and I'd get her back home. So I finally took her to a specialist in Pittsburgh. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It was called the Senior Institute. That's all they work with. He was amazing. Dr. Rubin. I can't say enough about him. And he started her on risperidone, which is really kind of like an antipsychotic. And my hope was even if it tamped down the delusion so it wasn't a constant thing, because, she'd cry on the phone with me that these people were coming in. She was feisty. I mean, there was some funny moments. One day she told me, I know there's a woman here also because they're stealing my clothes. And she said she was going to sit at the top of the basement steps because she thinks they were getting in the garage, and she was going to throw a bucket of water on them as they came in. And I'm like, well, Mom, I don't want you falling down the stairs, So I said, maybe put your chair back. She was very feisty with it. And, but once she started on the risperidone, it actually cleared up the delusion. And I think at that point she knew something was wrong, because she told me later when she was up at my house, she goes, Kathy, I think maybe I need to go to a nursing home. And I told her at that point, oh, Mom, don't worry, I'll never put you in a nursing home. And we'll come back to that later, because I did unfortunately have to do that. But so that's how we knew. And she kept going downhill. And do you want me to keep going with what we did next, or do you want to?
I want to ask, first of all, did you notice anything with Aricept when she took that?
I got to be honest, no, but I don't really know, because it wasn't going to bring back memories. But maybe it did slow it down, because we were able to keep her with home health. I was able to keep her in her house for almost a year after that. So.
But you noticed a much bigger difference with the
Oh my
risperidone when she
gosh.
started
Oh my
that.
gosh.
Okay.
I told Dr. Rubin, I said, you were a savior on that. That was wonderful. That really helped. She was also on, now here's the one thing we did find. She was on nortriptyline also. She had perimenopausal anxiety, and it never went away even after she went through. So she was on nortriptyline, was one of the first antidepressants. So she was on that. So when they put her on the other drugs, he felt like we should decrease the nortriptyline. But then I found that she then seemed depressed. So I'm like, we're going to have to re-up that. And that seemed to help. And then, of course, she was on verapamil. That was for her SVT. So those were the things that she was on.
Did you ever
which
have trouble with her taking her medications, or was she pretty d
so that comes for a little further in the journey. So, no, actually, it doesn't. So she was taking all her own medication. When she started with these delusions, one of the things we thought is maybe she's not taking her medications right. I had even got her little bowls. One was black, which meant those are the pills you take at night. One was orange. Those are the pills you take in the morning. And I finally took them away from her and had my brother that lived next door because they could easily come over in the morning and at night and do her pills. She was not happy with me over that. I did tell her, hey, the doctors think that we should monitor this medication. So we did begin to monitor her medication when the delusions started.
that was probably a good idea, but what a
Yeah,
blessing that you had a brother right next door that
right.
could do that. Okay. So, and when you say too she was diagnosed with advanced dementia,
Yeah.
did they ever give you what kind of dementia?
They did not. They did not. I mean, I can tell you a little more about it. And um, it got so my dad also had Alzheimer's. His was, I think, a step down. So he was good until 80. And then he was at the church, he sang, and he was there for choir practice. And somebody came and they just saw him sitting in his truck. So they knocked on the door and he was like out of it. So some sort of stroke. After that, we noticed a decrease in his mental acuity. He was like a brilliant man, and his mathematical ability started going first. And then he would plateau for a while and then have another episode, another step down. So his were like step downs. However, and we were able to keep him at home. And I had I had to talk my mom, and my mom did it. She was amazing. We had a hospital bed in the living room. And I kept telling her we need to have visiting angels come in. So we did start having them. And just as we were about to increase that, he ended up passing away. Um, However, his was never anxiety. He just he didn't know who any of us were. He lost all his functions. Like he had to wear pull ups that then really kind of went to diaper, more like of a diaper kind of concept. He couldn't walk in the end, and obviously stopped eating. So, but my mom's, it just got worse. She was on noreltryptyline. So and she would tell you she was a worrier all her life. Hers was very, very anxiety. Like people would tell me when I would tell them about my mom's delusions, like some people would tell me, well, their parents had it, but they were nice delusions. It was like they would see like their dead spouse or the queen came over to visit. And I'm like, no, no, my mom's is not pleasant. And it got worse. And and as we go further in the journey, I can tell you how it got worse. It was sad. It was trying to keep her anxiety under control.
And it's true that when you meet one person with dementia, you meet one person with dementia. They're all
Right.
different. And what I'm interested to ask is when you were saying, I think one of your brothers was trying to say to her, oh, nobody's breaking in, no one's doing this. How was it that you and your siblings learned that approach isn't working? Was it the
Well, she
counselor you
got really
mentioned or
mad at him. He actually she said, here's the footprints. And he actually took one of her shoes and showed her, this is your footprint. And she was so mad and so upset. And my pastor, who I'm good friends with, is also an actual certified counselor. So I called him to counsel us. I'm like, I have no idea, that was something for me to navigate. I had no idea how to navigate it. So he was very helpful in saying, she's going to wrap you into the conspiracy of these, you're part of the problem. So we just tried to tamp it down. And then when we met with Dr. Rubin, he explained a little more, but the medication helped more than anything. That medication really helped us. It was a
did
very
doc-
long journey as we went through different stages of this with my mom.
did
Yeah.
Dr. Rubin help educate you to say, try to enter her world? You
Yes.
can't
He
bring
also,
her. Yeah,
Yeah,
to this one. You can't reason with her.
right.
You're just gonna have to try to figure out maybe how to distract her from the break-in, or because showing her her shoe and her footprint, it's not gonna work.
Yes, and it's so counterintuitive to what you think you would do. Because at first, I think we all kind of did it. I didn't do it to the point of my older brother, but I'm like, oh, mom, we have all those videos. Nobody could be break. And and after we put everything up, I mean, we did so many things. We put little bells on the door, the basement door, and I mean, and Dr. Rubin also asked her, do you see him? No. Do you hear him? No. But the aftermath. And I think in her head, like some of those messes were hers, but I think in her head, she was back many years ago where it didn't look like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what happens with the disease.
Right.
So, okay, at this point, she's still in her own home.
Right.
You've changed the locks, you put bells on the doors, you've got cameras set up to help watch. You've done all of that. Your brother's coming over, doing her medication reminders. Before you talk about what happens next, give us an idea just of her. I like people to understand the financial situation. So, was she in a place where private care was a possibility? Was that affordable? Talk about just like her insurance and her finances to give us a picture of that.
Yes. So I knew at some point I was going to have to hire in home health care. We did with my dad, but we did it too late because it was really hard for me to talk my mom into doing it because she didn't want other people in her house. And
Very
I'm
normal.
like, Mom, you can't do this all by yourself. And then once she had somebody coming in a little bit, she loved it. And we were just getting ready to up that. My parents had a lot of forethought and they had an in-home healthcare plan with SHIPS. Well, it wasn't SHIPS when it started. And SHIPS is Senior Health Insurance Company of Pennsylvania. That's what it merged into. It was phenomenal. They started it a long time ago. So they were at the very top end of what we could get. However, we didn't hardly use it enough for my dad. And then for my mom, I tried to use it. We needed, she went in the hospital for an obstruction and had to have surgery at 92. And we did the surgery at 92 because my mom was fully functional. She was still driving. She was going down to work. And I don't know if I mentioned this. She worked with my dad and she worked as a bookkeeper down there until 94 years of age. And I tried to tell one of the doctors is like, do you just want to let her go and we'll give her medication? And I'm like, it's an obstruction. So in other words, her stomach would burst. And I'm like, no, I said, I'd rather her at least go through the surgery and die on the table, under anesthesia. And so my brother, unfortunately, I was the only one that could be back there because of COVID. And my brothers were all in agreement with me. And luckily, when she went in the surgery, when the surgeon came in, what it was is she had had a hysterectomy like 30 years before. And I didn't realize this, but your scar tissue continues to grow. And the scar tissue had grown around her colon. So all they had to do was cut away all that scar tissue. However, I needed a lot of care when she came home. They let her come home after 3 weeks. She was in ICU twice while she was 3 weeks in the hospital in Pittsburgh because she got C. diff and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a hard thing. But anyways, I had to do it. I hired my sister-in-law's a nurse, so she knew a retired nurse. So we hired a retired nurse. We did it all private pay because that's what we had to do. Luckily, my mom did have the funds to do that. And I also did volunteers from the church. I stayed there. I stayed up there, and I'm an attorney, so it was hard. Luckily, I had the autonomy to be able to try to do that. But at some point, I had to get back to work. And my brother lived next door. So I actually came up with itinerary. And I told my brothers, okay, what are you taking? Because we all slept with her for a while. And I took the weekends because I had to get back to work. And then I would drive up for the weekend. And it was great that my brothers and my sister-in-laws were wonderful. It was great that we all worked together to try to do this. But then she seemed to recover from that. So,
So she was in a situation though where thankfully she had the finances that you could hire private care. She had a long-term care insurance policy, which you're right was
yes,
very very like
That was the
not
question you asked me, and I
no, but
digressed a little
not
bit.
not many people though had that at that time. So that really is incredible that she
Yes.
had both of those things. And then
So so I
you
wanted
could
to
yeah.
say on that. So what happened is I tried twice during the COVID years and a little after the COVID years, and I couldn't get home health because it was like they were booked and they didn't have enough people helping. So I told my mom, let's not even pay this premium anymore. I'll just take care of you. And at that point, she seemed like she was invincible. I got to be honest. She just seemed, she broke her tailbone once and then just, at 92 and recovered from that hospital. However, when I stopped paying the premiums, there was $59,000 that was a non forfeiture amount. So I was able to, after she went through the delusions and I'd had her up here some and we got her medication going, I had visiting angels come in 5.5 hours a day to her home. And that lasted for close to a year, that I was able to pay visiting angels through the $59,000. And then we also had like my brother living next door would always come over in the morning. At that point, he just had to supervise her dress and supervise her toileting. That, when she was with me, that was different. And then my other brother always did the grocery shopping for her. We started that back in COVID, where he and my sister-in-law would do that. We also had a home, like I told you, my sister-in-law's a nurse, so she knew somebody that was a home health nurse. We had them coming in every so often to look her over because she was no longer sleeping in the bed. She was on a couch and she would get these wounds.
Mhm.
So taking care of the wound care, we had a podiatrist come in and take care of her there. It was lucky we were able to get people to come to the house.
So she's still in her home at this point, and then before you transfer on to what happens next, what I'm curious is before any of this even happened with your parents, what kind of conversations did you have, if any, ahead of time before you were in this caregiving journey? Did you ever talk to your parents about, "Hey, what is it that you're going to want? What are your wishes for the future?"
That is a great question. And it's one I tell people as an attorney you need to have. And I have it with, and also as you get older, you should make these decisions when you have the mind to make these decisions. So even before my dad started going downhill, I did, even though I'm in Ohio, I was able to do their wills and power of attorneys in Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, it's called an advance directive. Here, it's a living will. It's different than a DNR, which I can talk about later. But I knew all about what my parents wanted. I understood their long-term care insurance policy. I'm the one that worked that all out for my dad. After my dad passed, I then, amended and redid everything for my mom. And here's the big thing I tell people. So I was the healthcare power of attorney, which you're the person that can help make decisions. And I tell people another reason why that's important, it helps get you around HIPAA laws, which can be very restrictive. Hospitals may tell you stuff, but they can also say, you haven't given us the HIPAA form. Financial institutions, usually I found unless I gave them that financial healthcare power or the financial power of attorney, they weren't telling me anything. So I made sure in advance that her medical doctors, all the financial institutions had those power of attorneys, because I knew there was going to be a period of time where it was going to be solely me, until, I took my mom with me as much as I could until she really declined. And then really I was just, making all the decisions and doing everything. But as long as they had that, I was able to do everything. I was also able so Pennsylvania is a little different in Ohio. So my brothers were, my mom had a home. My one brother lived right next door. She was giving him the home, and there was 2 tracts of land that went with that were 2 acres. And my other brother worked with my dad at Houston Auto Service since he was 18 years old. So she was giving him that business, and there was 2 tracts of lands that went with that. So here in Ohio, you can do what's called a transfer and death deed, which we tell everybody to do, because then you don't have to go through all the, it's just automatic. After you die, you just have to do, in Ohio, a survivor's affidavit with a death certificate, and it automatically transfers. In Pennsylvania, they didn't have that, but I did joint with right of survivorship on the properties. So when my mom passed, that automatically went to my brothers. You had to do what's called a deed. It was a deed. Basically, Larry did a deed to Larry, and Doug did a deed to Doug. It was a
Is
little
this something
different,
that
but it's the same
like
concept.
you need an attorney though to do that for you, just to
You
set that
do.
up?
Yeah, luckily I am
Okay.
an attorney, so I did it all. But yeah, you need an attorney. Don't do rocketlawyer.com, which a lot of people do, because an attorney can help walk you through. You really should have a conversation, and you should take your parents and make your parents go while they still have their wits about them, so that they could honestly make some of these decisions ahead of time. And I knew what my parents felt about nursing homes, which really they weren't opposed to it. I'll tell you that. I was the one who felt like, no, no, I can keep you in my home. And then I was the beneficiary, since my brothers got that property. I was the beneficiary for the money. So I made myself a beneficiary on her accounts, which greatly helped to pay all the funeral expenses, because all I had to do was show a death certificate, and it was transferring death to me. I was the beneficiary. Some people make themselves joint, but you don't have to do that. I told my mom, I didn't want my mom to ever think I was doing anything untoward, which she trusted me explicitly. So did my brothers. We never got into fights. But I said, no, no, I'll be the beneficiary upon your death. So all I had to do was go in there, show them the death certificate. That money automatically went over to me. And I used all that money to pay for like everything, the catering and the stone, everything that you would pay for funerals.
For a
And
funeral.
that way everything went seamlessly. So plan as far in advance as you can plan. And it's important to, and I know it's a hard conversation to have. I know my brothers didn't want that conversation. It was probably a little easier for me because I talk to people all the time about that. But I wanted to know what my parents wanted, and under a will to specific bequest, like they gave certain things to certain grandchildren. And it didn't have to be anything of great value, but it was a sentimental thing. They wanted that grandchild to know that they were giving them. So I was able to help walk my parents through all that.
Do you, Kathy, and your husband have your documents done?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big, big advocate for long term care insurance because it helped my parents out so much. When they got theirs, it was a use it or lose it. But you don't have to, it's not use it or lose it anymore, at least if you get the right one. So I have one now. If I don't use my long term care insurance, it'll turn into a death benefit, like a life insurance policy.
I completely agree with you. I think we did an episode on long-term care insurance that I highly recommend people listen to, because you might be pleasantly surprised that it's not as expensive as you might think it is, especially the younger that you look into it. And it helps you understand what it will cover, also who's, probably the best um, customer to get a plan. So definitely recommend it. I completely agree with you, because it's giving you that just peace of mind that you do have some extra funds to help if you want to keep somebody at home, or even give them supplemental care in a facility. So back to your mom, I just want to throw in though that I hope you know how blessed you are to have a family the way that you did, because it's not typical in all my experience of the families that we worked with that a family is that close and works together that well, especially with brothers, and sons. I think sometimes I don't mean this rude by any means, but there's a lot of times that sons don't get completely involved. I don't think they see themselves filling that caregiver role, even though they're completely capable. And so it often falls on a daughter or, the sisters. And so to hear your story, your family sounds remarkable, and what a blessing. I mean, obviously your parents raised wonderful children. To be able to get along, not fight about things, be on the same page, and all step in and help just kudos to your family.
And I do want to point out a big shout out to my sister-in-laws. They did a lot. Like my brother's like helping with her hygiene or, doing things like that. They let my sister-in-laws do it. So my sister-in-laws were just like you'll find out when my mom moved here, my husband our spouses were absolutely amazing. When I brought my mom up to stay with me, I actually got a little thank you gift for each of my sister-in-laws because they didn't have to do that. And, I wanted to say, what a wonderful thing you did helping take care of my mom. And like I said, having them, my one sister-in-law, my brother lived next door was amazing. And having a sister-in-law that was a nurse was amazing.
Very helpful. So, okay, so at this point now, mom's still at her house. You've got about 5.5 hours of non-medical home care coming in. You've got a private nurse checking in on her. When is it now that you're making this decision that, okay, staying in her home is not going to be feasible?
Yes. It was so we started the home care in August before she came here. So August 2024. And I got to be honest, I did not think my mom would make it a year. And I knew I had a finite amount of money for in-home health care. So in March of 2025, I was like, I'm going to have to move her up with me, which was always the intent. However, I did not have a first floor master. So I had to add on to my house to do a first floor master and also a bathroom that was equipped for my mom, all the handrails to get to the toilet and the handrails to get into the shower. At that point, she was still mobile with a walker, but, she still needed all that. So we started that construction. And I will tell you, I talked to my mom in March and April because I thought she would balk because she loved her home. So I kind of, I would throw it out every so often. Hey, mom, we're going to be moving you up with me. And, it seemed to go over okay. But the one time she looked at me and she goes, oh, Kathy, she goes, you're not going to like me very much when I move in with you. And I think she knew she was declining. So I was hoping the construction would be done in July, but it was not. The very end of, or the very beginning of July, my sister-in-law went over in the morning because on Sunday she would go over in the morning. My mom was a very spiritual, faithful person, and she would always watch ever since COVID, actually, my sister-in-law next door would go over and they'd watch the church service on Zoom or whatever they had it on. She walked over and found my mom laying outside the bathroom on the floor. My one sister-in-law that's a nurse came up and checked her and she seemed okay. I went up that day and I think that was her first TIA, the mini kind of transient stroke. Because when I saw her, I had just seen her 2 weeks before because I went up once a month at the least. I went up once a month to do I was doing all her finances. And at first, my mom would not let me do anything electronically. I had to do it the way she had done it. And when she was still had her wits about her a little bit, I would write everything, I would do everything, but I'd let her sign. But then she got to the point where she couldn't sign her name anymore either. But anyways, when I saw her, I couldn't believe it. Her face looked like it had dropped. She had like, you might know it, kyphus or something with the K, like she was a little bent over anyways, but her neck had dropped more and her face looked like it dropped, her neck had dropped, and she seemed not as good. So I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get this room done. And in my opinion, she needed to come up in July, but it wasn't done until August 1st. So I went out and got her and brought her back with me. I will say, I don't know if my brothers, really got how bad she was, because I was telling my one brother, well, I'm sleep deprived because we actually, the first week I slept in there, we had I had a bed in there, and then she had just a twin bed that we had put in there that she was sleeping in. They were horrible nights, horrible nights. She'd wake up not making sense and having to go to the bathroom, and I'm trying to get her to the bathroom. So it was very difficult. My one brother's like, once she gets used to the place, she won't have to sleep in there anymore. And I told him, Doug, she's so far past that. She's never going to get used to this. She was calling me Elsa a lot, which was her sister's name. She called my husband her other sister's name, or Bill or Bob. His name's Mark. You know what I mean? She was going downhill. Um, I knew though, before I brought her up here, I knew I needed in-home health care or I wouldn't make it. So I got home instead, who did it in our area, but they couldn't start the first week. And that first week was tough. Very sleep deprived. I mean, you had to do everything. We had to toilet her, we had to dress her, we had to comb her hair. It was like having an infant. And because of her anxiety, the one thing that seemed to give her peace, she'd get up on her walker and she could go in my sunroom and go around the pool table. And at the beginning, I would just go in and supervise her because she seemed pretty steady. I played the piano. So I'm like, you want to hear me play the piano? And then she would sing. I was surprised. She joined in and singing the chorus of some hymns with me, which made my day. I'm like, well, that was worth all of this. That was precious. She couldn't, because her vision had gone downhill. She's really like legally blind. She couldn't really watch TV very well. And then the other thing that would happen is she would think what's happening on the TV was happening. So TV started to become upsetting to her. So like you could only do things for like 3 minutes at a time. I'd read to her, but then we'd get off that and I'd play, I tried to get her a fidget pillow or a fidget blanket. That didn't, she goes, what am I supposed to do? She wasn't aggressive, but she goes, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm like, touch everything. So she would touch everything. She goes, I'm done. And I gave her a baby doll. She goes, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know. Touch it. Okay, I'm done. She was just so anxious. And then in the first week, she ended up having a TIA, in my opinion. And I went in and she was a 2-person assist. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't lift her anymore. So we got a wheelchair. And I thought, oh my goodness. But because of her anxiety, she worked and worked and worked to get back up on that walker. However, we saw a little bit of more decline in her cognitive abilities. So then she had a second TIA. Every time she had a TIA, I would and her head would go down even more. So when she'd have a TIA, she would have trouble walking, trouble standing. Her neck would go down more. And I called hospice in at that point because she was also seeming to have trouble swallowing. So hospice came in, but then again, she seemed to kind of physically bounce back, but not, every time mentally a little less. And then I had a video call with her family doctor from Pennsylvania. And I asked him, I said, I didn't even know you could improve from these TIAs like this. And he said, you can, but it's not usually at her age. She was almost 96 at that point. But we really felt with her anxiety, and she would eat, and that was anxiety driven. So I think that's what was keeping her alive, is standing up and trying to walk. And, when we ate, eating seemed to be the only thing that tried to give her a little comfort. And she would just say over and over again, help me, help me, help me, even when you're there helping her,
Oh.
And, she just kept declining. And we increased home instead. We increased the care because I didn't think I'd need care every day, but I did. I needed that break. It was very, very hard. My husband was so, so helpful and so, so kind. I mean, he helped with the toileting. He helped with everything. And he said, Kathy, let's do every other night sleeping in there. That really helped because at least when I knew I was up all night, the next night I could get sleep. Finally was working. So with hospice, I was asking them, I'm like, well, what does hospice do with this? Since it's not physical, it's just like mental. And I was telling them, it's really hard at night. We're so sleep deprived. And they're like, oh, we help with that too. Like, you could call us and we can help you with medicine. I'm like, yes.
Please.
So they put her on trazodone. My mom was an anomaly. I remember the hospice nurse saying, my mom was on all these medications, and she goes, they think we're, snowing her in kind of be, but my mom was not. She was still anxious. She could still get up and want to walk around. And she said, I would tell them, no, this medication does not seem to be having the calming effect. And we had to increase her trazodone. And then that did start to help, where she would maybe only get up once at night. Now when she did get up, she was kind of, she would, there were comical things she said. I got to be honest. She told me, I told her once, I said, well, it's night, Mom. We need to sleep. She goes, why is it night? I'm like, well, the moon comes up, the sun is down. And then, like with my husband once, he goes, everybody's sleeping. And she looked at my husband. She goes, well, you're not.
You're
There was some things she would say that are funny.
He's
You
like,
just,
I want to be, but
yeah,
yeah.
you just
Oh,
have some comedy things. I mean, not comedy, but there were some things she said that would kind of tickle us a little.
you have to laugh. I mean,
And
you
you have,
have to in
right,
something such a difficult, like
right.
when you're dealing with that, especially, I would imagine the days seem 10 times longer
Oh my gosh.
when you're going through that, when you're like you're saying, you couldn't even keep her occupied for more than a few minutes
No,
before it was on to the next. And then you're also not sleeping at night. And you're just, did you ever have a caregiver that would work at night and stay overnight?
I could have got that. We didn't do that. I did increase them. We did 4 hours at first. I kept increasing. And then I got the 5 hours. We didn't have them on Sundays to start with. And then I got them on Sundays. And we're like, okay, we're going to need them every day because we needed some sort of break. And I'll be honest, my husband and I'd be like, ugh. So like when we took over after, she had sundown syndrome really bad. So they hospice advised us to give her trazodone. Um, at that point too. So that it helped a little bit, but her sundowning was really bad. It was bad. There was nothing we could do to comfort her. We finally got hymns that would come up on the TV, and she would enjoy those, but you had to sing them with her like you were. And then she would always yell, help me, help me. And I said, well, I'm singing, Mom, I'm singing. And even the home health nurses would say, she keeps asking me to help her, but I'm right here. And I said, I know. And it got harder and harder. And I could tell for them it was getting harder. I think she might have had another TIA after that. But my husband went to Yellowstone. And so she came up with me the 1st of August. And then before Thanksgiving, I did move her into nursing home, which I'll talk about. But he went on a Yellowstone trip that had already been planned with a bunch of guys for fly fishing. And I knew I couldn't do this myself. So we did respite care under hospice, but only certain nursing homes would take it. So I got in one and I picked it because they had less people, and I'm not going to name it. They had less people and it was just all females. And I went there, and I probably shouldn't have gone there at sundowning syndrome because I had a private pay for 3 of the days, because if I wanted the whole week, hospice only did 5. So I went to give them the check, and then they took me down on the unit. It was, I'd never been on a memory care unit. And a lot of the people were sundowning. Now they seemed physically better than my mom. Some of them were walking around a lot, but some were really out of it. I wanted to meet my mom's roommate, but she wasn't there. She was sleeping in on another person's bed, because I guess they do that. And they told me that people come in and shop in other people's rooms just because they don't know better. They sleep on other people's beds, which I was like, oh my goodness. And also, I asked if I could meet her roommate, and they said, well, she's kind of ornery and difficult with the staff. And I'm like, mom's really sweet. I don't know about this. She goes, oh, she'll be sweet with her. So I'm like, okay. So I tried to get it when I got out of there, and I just started crying. I felt so guilty, and I'm like, I can't do this. Then I came home and I told my husband. He goes, let's get home instead to also go in there. I said, yes. So I also had Home Instead go in each day for 4 hours. That way, at least I felt comfortable that I was getting feedback from Home Instead as to what was going on. And I really, really liked Home Instead. I really, really liked visiting angels. So I liked the women that helped my mom. I thought they were so loving and caring, and it was great to have them there.
I want to say a couple things. So, to clarify, I don't know if many people realize that you can do those respite stays with hospice. And so, what you're saying is there are hospice agencies that have contracts with local skilled nursing facilities or sometimes even hospitals where they have a floor or part of the floor at a hospital. And you're allowed to take the hospice patient and have them do what you called a respite stay, which is typically 5-day period. And they'll take your loved one to that unit to obviously let you get some respite and rest that you need, and they will fully care for them, and then they can bring them back home like you're saying. And I think it's genius what you did also is that I don't think a lot of people realize you can hire your non-medical home care agency to actually go into facilities. I'm going to share because I used to own one that the facilities don't always love that because they don't like that somebody else is, overseeing what they're doing, but that's not the intention. The intention truly is to give that client more one-on-one attention, which it's not reasonable to think that the staff at a facility can do that when they have a whole the whole hallway could be one aide that has to cover that. So it's really meant to help the facility to say, I'm just going to give more one on one attention to this person. The family's hired me to do that. And so it's a great, if you're able to do that financially, it's a great resource to say, I do want someone in there when I can't be there 24 hours a day. So I can understand that you had that guilt, but I can also understand you needed you needed to sleep. You needed, a few days of rest. And at that point, so she's in that nursing home. Did you bring her back home when your husband came back from his trip?
Yes, and I do want to point out, which is why I'm not naming the home. I told them that she's going to get up at night. I told them that. I said she's mobile enough to get up at night. I actually wanted bed rails. You're not allowed to do bed rails anymore, yes, because that's considered restraint. I wanted to do a bed alarm. They told me I couldn't do that. Um, I wanted a mat, but they said I had to have a prior approval for that. So I'm like, oh my Lord. I said, well, you're going to have to know she's going to yell out for help, and hopefully you guys will hear her. She fell within the second day of being there. Luckily, again, she didn't seem to get hurt. It looked like maybe she just slid out of the bed. So I did, and then, but I was trying not to go up there because it's not respite care for me. And everybody had told me, you're not really doing respite if you're going and visiting, and plus she's just going to want to come home. So I had given, and you mark everything too that it's theirs. And when I did her medicines, I'd given her the exact amount of medicine that she was supposed to have for the stay that she was going to be there. So when I went to go get her, she was in the little a little community area. Soon when I saw her, she at least recognized who I was, even though she called me Elsa instead of Kathy. But she just started crying when I told her I was bringing her home, and my husband was with me. And yeah, we went and got her as soon as my husband came home. But that night, when I was done her pills, there was pills left. So there was 2 days they didn't properly give her pills. And when she came home, I could tell that she was worse. She couldn't walk really when she came home. And I'm like, what the heck? Because at that point, and she improved. She improved while she was at my home. And I do want to go back when we talk about that respite care. When hospice first told me when I moved my mom in that I could have respite care, I poo pooed it because I thought, I am not going to do that. Okay. And then by the time I was like, I need it. I need you to do it. So when my mom came back from that home, I kind of thought, well, if I have to put her in a home, I'm not putting her in that one. And I'm going to look around at a bunch of other ones. So And I can talk about that when we get to what happens in the journey.
So when did you decide that it was time?
Yeah. So there was and I'll say that I'll do a shout out to this place, Middleton. It's in Granville, which is only a couple minutes from my house, Granville, Ohio. We had actually contacted them um, before on the hospice, but they didn't take hospice. And we let them know at that point, my mom's long term care money was used up. And so we told them we'd be private pay. I don't know if that helped or not, but they hadn't, because they had told us at the beginning that there's such a long wait list for there, would never get in. So a lady calls me from there, and I think it was on the weekend. I know it was at night, and talked to us for like over an hour. She was so kind and told us we had a place. Now, before they took my mom, they came out and evaluated her, which I wasn't even sure what that was. I'm like, well, she's bad. I don't know what to say. She's not aggressive, but she's going to yell out. I kept telling them she yells out. She yells out a lot. Now they do gummies, and they thought maybe that helped with the yelling out kind of concept. But they approved her, and before Thanksgiving, she moved into Middleton. Felt extreme guilt because it was horrible. I felt extreme guilt over it. I felt like I had failed because I told my mom I would keep her, and I told my brothers it was my intentions to keep her here. I mean, obviously, I built this whole room for her. And, my brothers understood because the other thing that was really hard was me being up here without any family. And, I called my brothers. I said, can you guys come up and see her? And, they worked. And so they did, each came up twice. And I think, especially when they came the second time, they saw how bad it was. And so they understood. I'm like, I can't do this. It was a real strain on my marriage. I was getting like depressed, not depressed where you need a diagnosis or anything like that, but it was just hard. And the other thing I wanted to point out, we were great caregivers to her, but I felt like I was losing the role of being a daughter. Like I felt like, yeah, I was giving her good care, but I was kind of frustrated in my head because it was constant, help me, help me, help me, help me. I mean, you never had a minute. You did not have a minute to yourself. And it was especially frustrating if you tried to put her down for a nap and she didn't go. Because, that was a time where you could at least get some period of time to yourself, and she would do best if she had a little morning nap and a little afternoon nap, but sometimes it wouldn't work. And, Home Instead tried too when they were here. So it was hard. So I felt a lot of that. And when she went into Middleton, I thought they were wonderful. However, she did fall. Within the first week of there, they had let me do a bed alarm as long as I purchased it. So she had a bed alarm. And I tried to tell them she's going to get up. We had bed rail. Oh, and I should say when hospice came into the picture, they required me to get a hospital bed, but they paid for it, or her Medicare paid for it. And I was allowed to do bed rails, but you're not allowed to do bed rails at nursing homes, which I learned that. I didn't know that.
It's
But
just it's just crazy to me. That's a whole nother conversation because it's like I feel like the people that make those rules are not in a caregiving role. They're making these rules because they're talking about the dignity of people. But if you are caring for someone or you truly understood this condition where it's very dangerous for these people, and you do need some tools. You need the rails, you need a bed alarm. You're not doing that because you're not trying to treat them with dignity. You're trying to do it to keep them safe so that you can react faster. And it's just very frustrating. But
it was
the
very frustrating. I was
yeah,
glad they
that's
let the bed alarm.
terrible.
Oh, and I wanted to point out, if I could
Yes.
show this. So when my mom moved here, we had these cameras, and it was WYSE
Okay.
is where we got them. And we actually had two different type of cameras in there, but this one worked well. And you had a little monitor. And so when she was in there, we'd have a monitor and we could hear her. So we would hear her calling out for us. So it wasn't like she would get entangled in the bed rails or anything like that. We would go in there, but we would keep her, safe. And then when she would she usually took her afternoon nap out here on the couch. Well, it was easy. You just move these out here. We had the out here, and we'd have the monitor, and you would watch her out here. So when Home Instead was here, we had it all set up because we had extra monitors. So we had one set out here to watch her on the couch, and one in there to watch her on the bed. And we knew that in advance. I knew when I brought her, we were going to need all these cameras. And so we actually had two different types. And I can probably get you that later. My husband had brought me, he's the one that researched it and got them and put them up. But it was a wonderful thing to have. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So
We'll include a link to those in the
yeah.
podcast show notes. And were there any other products or resources that you found helpful?
So obviously we had all the basics. We had the wheelchair, which my husband and I just went out and got that because that first TIA, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. She was a little woman. She was, under 100 pounds, but when they're dead weight, like I can't do this. And I was afraid of dropping her. So we did that. We actually had a portable commode right next to her bed because we found that way we didn't have to go into the bathroom. That was in that room because it was a master, but it was easier trying to just get her out, get her on there, and get her back to sleep that way. The shower chair, of course. Our shower that we built, it has a rain shower, which we did not use for her, obviously, but it had where you could take it out and
A handheld, which is very helpful. Yes.
So those are the things that I could think of. Oh, I don't know if we talked about this. She had lots and lots of hobbies. She was a reader, constant reader. She loved crafting and sewing and cooking and things like that. And so at the beginning of the journey, with her vision, we just got large print books, and I tried to get her an iPad to show her how you could zoom, into that. And she didn't like that though. And then we went to magnifiers. A magnifier you just put over the book. And then we got a floor magnifier because she also liked doing her word searches. But, by the time she came to my house, I brought that stuff with me, but her dementia had gotten to the point where she couldn't do any of that stuff cognitively. She had lost all those skills, So, I felt so bad for her. And she was such a kind woman. I just felt bad. And my husband and I are like, this is probably, that's just what she needs to say is help me, because that's probably what she's thinking.
Yeah.
And have mercy on me, and I would read her Psalm 23 a lot, and that seemed to comfort her a little bit. So
it is just because you realize when they're saying that, I think there's a stage that a lot of them go through where they know they're not in their right mind.
Right.
And I can't imagine what that feels like, where you can't, like you're saying, you can't do the tasks that you used to do and love. And so that's frustrating. But that if you're aware of it, on top of it, it's understandable that she would say those things, that she's saying, please, like, have mercy on me, or, be patient, give me grace and help me, because that's what she needed. That's exactly what she needed.
It was hard. And again, like you had to take her to the toilet. That got worse. And, you had to treat hemorrhoids. She would have blowouts. That was horrible. So you're trying to clean her up. And I kind of had to disengage a little bit to, compartmentalize, because I knew this. I'm like, if my mom was in her right mind, here I am, cleaning up all her private areas and doing all that. It's very difficult, but we had to do everything. And I think that's why my mom, back in March of 1995, when she said, you're not going to like me very much when I come, because I think she still had a little more cognition then to knew she was going downhill, And then my husband and I and I know this sounds just kind of funny, but like, she didn't even know who we were. So we're like, dang, we're not even getting credit for this. You know what I mean? It's like, you're doing it because you love the person. But that also helped a little bit with the move to the nursing home, because we're like, I don't know that she even knows who's coming in and helping her. You know what I mean? I think she maybe recognized us as somebody maybe that she knew.
I think they recognize that you're this kind, friendly face.
Yeah.
I think they recognize that, you're looking at them with soft eyes and a smile, and they can, they just know this is someone who I feel safe with, and that's okay. That you're at least giving her comfort and not feeling like it's somebody who's breaking into her house.
Right.
It's
Right.
a friendly face that is I feel comfortable around. How long did she remain at
With me.
Middleton? What in
Middleton, not long.
Middleton?
So with me, she was from like 4 months. And then we took her into Middleton, and she was not there very long. She was there 6 weeks before she passed. When she fell on the bathroom floor that was tile, and they said she was complaining of her head and her hip. So, we went down there, and hospice was there too. They got called in. Um, she could walk. I could still get her up on her walker, so I knew it wasn't her hip. But then she started complaining of her ribs, and like we'd go to lift her to try to get her into the wheelchair or to the bed, and she would cry out in pain. So I really thought maybe she cracked a rib, and not like we would have done any. And I should say this, by the time hospice came in, I did do a DNR. So, which was different than a living will or an advance directive, because a DNR is, you're not resuscitate, you'll treat them, but you're not doing anything like putting the paddles on them if they have a heart attack or anything like that. And it was time for her to go, because at this point she was miserable, and I felt bad how much anxiety she had. So I had asked for an x-ray still to be taken. However, they did an x-ray, a portable x-ray of her hip, and I knew it wasn't her hip at that point. I'm like, oh, I said, you didn't do the ribs. And they said no. And I just let it go, because I'm like, well, but we were still trying to calm her down. So they started giving her Ativan in addition to all the other stuff. Oh, I contacted Dr. Rubin in Pittsburgh again and said, this risperidone, I told him everything that was going on. And he switched her to Seroquel. He actually did that. He actually switched her to Seroquel before we put her in Middleton. This is kind of funny. I wanted her to be like not yelling out so much when she went to Middleton. I'm like, I'm trying to, like sending a kid to preschool or something. I want you to be good. So we got her on Seroquel, and that did seem to help. But he told us, you just keep increasing that, Kathy, as you need to increase that. And it did help. However, she just continued to decline at Middleton. I mean, clearly, by the time I got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore, she was bad. She was bad. And, but I would walk into, when I would go to the home, it was hard for me. We wouldn't every day, but I would try to go around lunchtime, and they would have her out there at the tables, and nobody else there was calling out, which was kind of remarkable to me. But I could hear my mom, help me. So I always felt like I had the bad child in the school. But I started coming earlier so that I could always give her lunch. But so I always went, we'd go give her lunch and then put her to bed. But there was like one time we went after she was on the Ativan. So I thought that was really helping. And she was we couldn't get her back to sleep. And I was talking to one of the nurses there, and she said, well, Kathy, this is normal for your mom. I said, it is? I thought we had got it under control, all this calling out. She goes, no, not really. She goes, I think the Ativan maybe is doing more to her physically, because she was no longer able to walk on the walker. We only had her in the wheelchair. Now, I thought I had called hospice in because we went there one day and it seemed like she had another TIA or something. And after that, she never could walk again. And she couldn't even, like before, when she first came to me, we'd put the food on the spoon, but she could lift it to her mouth. Like, you had to feed her. And but anyways, So that was disappointing. Like we could not believe. And I had another, I guess you got a different hospice nurse once you were in a nursing home. And they said, Kathy, I don't think there's any combination of medication we're going to give her that will actually calm this calling out or this anxiety down, which was really disappointing because you would think there could have been. Like one day we came and I walked in her room and she was screaming. And I'm like, and she was shaking. And I got her up and said, Mom, what's wrong? And I think she was having, like, she thought somebody was stealing her money. I said, No, Mom, I'm in charge of your money. Don't worry. And then she was talking about these big dogs that were outside. It was a real shame. Her dementia was so anxiety inducing. It was horrible, many times crying leaving, or crying going. It was horrible to see what was going on with my mom. And I thought, this is just horrible.
Well, I can't imagine not having some combination of medications that could
Right,
help that, and how discouraging that had to feel to be told, "I
right.
don't think there's any combination we can give her." And
They said the only thing we could do to calm it was to make her comatose. And, of course, we didn't want to do that. Now, I did know once she got to the point where she couldn't do the walker, she wouldn't fall out of the bed anymore, But I also knew, because I researched it, that once, because I kind of figured she had a cracked rib or something. Once you get something like that, I had researched it, you don't last that much longer.
it's
So,
also hard when you know, you did what you obviously you did an amazing job caring for her, but when you move somebody with dementia, it's really hard on them,
yes, yes,
right? Just
yes,
to figure out how to adjust. So even moving
yes,
her out of her home to you, and then she goes into the
yes,
facility, that's
yes.
just, I mean, that happens to everybody, but it's just very difficult to try to understand that this is my home now. This is the and so that creates anxiety on top of it. But I'm sad to hear that they couldn't offer you something that could just help calm that anxiety. And it's
Well, and they kept saying maybe the gummies would work, but because she was a Pennsylvania resident and we were Ohio, like I guess even though the doctor was recommending it and getting the medical stuff, like they never started it. And so I don't know if down the line that would have helped, but we never, because I kept saying, why is it taking so long? And they thought maybe it was because of that, because she, was really a resident of Pennsylvania and we were trying to get it in Ohio. So I never got to see with my mom whether that would be a big help. They did have us get for us to go, but I think she was so far along that, by the time Mark and I would give her a half of this little gummy, I don't know that I really saw, like I guess what we would see is that she still said, help me, but maybe with a less strident, help me.
I
But
feel like we have some lobbying to do with our lawmakers. I mean, this is just, it should not be this difficult
right,
to get, good care, to get bed rails and a bed alarm and a gummy. It shouldn't be that difficult. When
right.
a family's in a situation like yours and all you're wanting to do is provide relief to her. That's it. You're not
That's
doing anything with ill intentions.
And I kept telling hospice, I said, I'm just kind of giving her comfort care. I want her to be comfortable. I don't want all this anxiety. And they tried. And we did increase the Seroquel per. They did listen to Dr. Rubin. I said, okay, this is what the specialist is saying. So they agreed to switch her over to the Seroquel, which did help for a while, but it seemed like everything would help a little bit, and then you had to increase it. And I mean, she was like that. Nobody could believe it. Nobody could believe on the medication she was on, she was still having this much anxiety. and
We definitely saw people, it always surprised me that they would be, they would get prescribed a medication like that, that usually it would relax them and they would have the polar opposite effect. So I
no,
was surprised by that, that it happened more often than you would think, that it would not work. It would actually be more harmful. And so they'd have to try something different. When
Well, I
you
would
did the
say with
DNR,
hers, it seemed to help, but not, you would have to keep increasing. It would only help briefly, and then you'd have to increase the dosage. And then with the Ativan, they did do morphine a couple times too because she was in pain. But they're like, Kathy, the only way she's actually truly getting peace is if we make her comatose, and we don't want to do that. And I actually think there's rules. I found out that nursing homes have. You know what I mean on that?
of course, more rules.
Yeah,
Shocker.
a lot of
What
rules.
about when you did the DNR, did you
Mhm.
work with hospice to get that
Yes,
done?
yes.
Okay. Because the
Hospice
DNR
signed
has
it.
to be signed by the doctor.
Right.
Okay. So I was just curious if they helped you facilitate that.
Yeah.
What do you feel like was the best lesson that you've learned from this caregiving experience?
It was harder than I thought. It was harder than I anticipated. So I would, okay, so I would say I had planned a lot in advance. And, so I had things set up. Like I knew I was going to do in-home health care. Even in Pennsylvania, I held off until I'm like, okay, if I'm going to keep in her house, I need in-home health care. Because I knew I only had a set amount of money at that point, which if you actually have a policy, you wouldn't have a set amount. But because we stopped paying the premium, I only had a set amount. So I did that when I needed to. I moved her up here and I knew I needed home instead. But like I had everything in place as to, the power of attorneys and that really helped. That was seamless. Like everybody talked to me easily. The financial, everybody talked to me easily because I had given everybody a copy of it. So that was helpful. But I got to be honest, I don't know how you prepare emotionally for it unless you're in the midst of it. It's just a really tough situation. And some people are worse than others. Like I said, I think my mom, well, some people get really aggressive. And so I'm very blessed that neither my dad nor my mom got aggressive. I think that would be very, very difficult. But having my mom with that hyper anxiety and you couldn't leave her alone for a minute. You really couldn't. It was really, really tough and really trying. And people told me this, and so I can say this, although it didn't take away my guilt or my sense of failure, there is a point where you need that nursing home. The beauty that I can say of that is I felt like I got to be a daughter again. Like when I went and I was with my mom for a set period of time, I could be really, I'd sing to her and I could be super sweet and read to her. And I didn't have that frustration level that I had when she's here and it's 24/7, so I did like that. I really am glad toward the end I got to be a daughter again. And I know one of the things you had asked before when we were talking about doing this is 3 adjectives. So I would say exhaustion was one, sleep deprivation, stressful. But my third one would be fulfilling, that I can look back on this and, oh, I do have something to say what I would do different. But for the most part, fulfilling, I feel like I did everything I could. And I did get I got to spend the last 5.5 months of my mom's life with her every day. And and I can't remember if I said this on this actual podcast or not, but I play the piano. And so one day I was like, well, we're going to hear me play the piano. I was thinking of things I could do. And I'm playing the piano and she's listening. And if you could get her to do anything for 5 to 10 minutes, that was a win. And then I said, well, why don't I play some hymns? Because she was a very spiritual, faithful person. So I started playing hymns. And when I got to the chorus, she started singing with me. That is one of my favorite memories and one that I will treasure from here on out. And so she always did it. Count your many blessings and sing them over again to me were the 2 that she would always join in. And I had those played at her funeral. They were just wonderful things. And the one day I told you when I was at Middleton and I was we couldn't get her calm back down. I just kept reading Psalm 23 to you. And then all of a sudden, after I had read it like 5 times, in a very calming voice, she joined in. She wasn't calming when she joined in, but, she was saying it, in a a strident voice, but I was like, that meant a lot to me,
Yeah,
So I am glad that I got to spend all that time with her. But I do want you to ask me, if you're not going to ask me next, but what would I do different? Um, I think she had dementia before we knew she had dementia. And that is what I mean, she was in her 90s. So I was really kind of surprised that doctors were not doing cognitive tests on a regular basis. And we did not see it, obviously, until the delusions, because that was pretty evident that something was going on. And when she did the cognitive testing, it was bad. And she was diagnosed at that point with severe dementia. I wish, and I don't know why it's not a normal thing. I really think doctors should do those cognitive tests on a more routine basis. But, I would be more of an advocate for somebody, hey, even if your parent seems fine, this is a good thing to do. It's just like a well check. We're going to check you out because whether it would have helped or not, I wish I would have started on Aricept sooner because the doctor said it's not going to help her get anything back, but it might help her not lose any more. She did lose more. Whether it slowed it down, I don't know because she didn't know who and we were in the end. But that I've told some people who are older, I said, you might want to get checked because the sooner you start on that, the better maybe that will help you. And I'm sure
I
there's other,
agree with that. I
yeah,
think they should all be doing that just so you have a baseline. You've got a
right.
baseline to work from and know that if anything's changing. But I do agree with you that it's like at that age, I'm surprised that they wouldn't have
Yeah.
been doing that.
So I
Um,
really like my husband's dad is 91 now. And, they're like, oh, he doesn't have dementia. And I'm like, yeah, he might not yet. But, you still should be getting that done as you go
it
forward.
probably depends on the doctor, is what I'm guessing. Some
Yeah.
of them probably make it part of their regular annual exam, but they really all should.
They
I
all should.
agree.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned a book that I
Yeah.
wanted you to share.
Yeah.
So tell
So
us about the book.
some friends had gotten me some things after both of my parents, of course, have died, and they both have died, unfortunately, from Alzheimer's. But it's called The Orphan Adult, and it's by Alexander Levy or Levy, Levy. And it was funny because when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of how I feel. Like, so when they say, like, when one parent passes, you're sad, of course, but your focus goes more to the other parent because that other person is grieving and you're trying to help them grieve and you're trying to help them. So your focus is more on that other parent. And I would say that was true. My focus went more to my mom because her and my dad were like amazing, amazing marriage. Just loved each other tremendously and were life partners. The other thing it says is you then become the next in line, which I thought, oh, that's so true. I'm now the oldest generation, And then I will also say this is a kind of a caveat just because I've had both parents now die of Alzheimer's. You know, I'm like, oh boy, heredity. And it was funny. One of my brothers said to his wife, he goes, I told my wife, I'm going to apologize now, but, I did tell my husband. And so I'm looking at things now for me, because I know it's in my genetic line to, what can I do to try to, be really healthy?
It does change, and it's also, I would imagine, you're more open to having discussions with your family about
For
your
sure.
wishes.
Yeah.
And it like makes you just a little, you realize that we're all going to be in that situation, so that if you can have those discussions, just like you shared, your mom told you she was actually okay with a facility, even though that was hard on you and you felt the guilt. She was telling you, though, like, Kathy, I am okay with it if that's what happens. And you can hopefully share the same thing with your family and your children, to say, I'm okay with that. And I've already told my kids, I'm like, I'm fine if you put me in one. I just would like you to come and hold my hand and smile at me and visit sometimes. That's what I would like. So if you can say that while you're still in your right mind and you're giving your kids that peace to say, I don't want you to feel that guilt. Doesn't mean you're not going to still feel the guilt, but I think it's a gift that if you can tell your children, I'm okay with this, and while you're still in your right mind, it's a blessing.
And Amy, I'm glad you brought that up because that was so true. I knew, and I told my husband, my mom would not want me to strain my marriage or to feel this exhaustion and stress. And I knew she had said it'd be okay to go to a nursing home. So that really, really helped in the long run for everything.
Is there any other piece of advice you would share with people?
There was something when you were saying that. Now I'm trying to remember with the kids. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, with my kids, I've been very open as to, how I foresee things and what my wishes would be. That's the biggest thing. And I say that not only have going through this journey, but as an attorney, you prepare as much as you can prepare and talk to your parents. And you want to talk to your parents while they have their wits about them. And I will also say on that long-term care insurance, you mentioned it, and I want to emphasize it. The younger you are, because you go through a physical exam, and then they tell you how much it's going to cost. So you do it when you're a little healthier, so it's not costing as much. I wanted to see if I had anything. I'd written a couple. Oh, this was it. I also wanted to point out, so I told you I had Home Instead coming to the respite care. I also had them come to Middleton. Even though I thought that was a great facility, I wanted it for the transition. So for 2 weeks, they came in every day just for, I didn't feel like I needed them for the 4 hours, 5 hours, but they came in for 3 hours a day, which was really nice because I usually do 4. And then it went to every other day. And then we were down to twice a week when my mom passed. So, and my mom became, how she passed was I was actually in Columbus. So I wasn't, which was about 30 minutes away. I got a call and they told me my mom was unresponsive. So she actually died pretty quickly after she was that was Monday of Christmas week. So, but what was nice is that my daughter was flying in from Texas, and we didn't tell her until she got there that night. And then she, was very emotional and said, "Oh, she's going to die before I see her." But my mom did live on Tuesday, and she had written a little tribute to my mom that she wanted to read at the funeral. And so she asked us to leave the room, and she read the tribute to my mom. I was able to call my brothers on the phone. I told them we could FaceTime, although my mom was unresponsive, but I could have them on the phone. And my one brother opted not, but my one other brother said yes. And when he was on the phone, she opened her eyes. I couldn't believe, I said, "Larry, her eyes are open." So I feel like she knew, he was there. And they tell you even if they're unresponsive, because I was singing and reading to her the whole time. But she actually opened her eyes, and then they came in. You know how they wet the sponge and put it in your mouth?
Mm-hmm.
So a girl came in to do that, and she voluntarily sucked on it, which was amazing. And I got to be honest, I had heard that you have an awakening before you pass. So I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to pass now. So I waited another 2 hours, but then she seemed fine. But then we were playing some songs for her. I Can Only Imagine. I don't know if you know that song by Mercy Me, but we were playing that and she was smiling, and I was telling her how she was going to go to heaven to see. And she was not afraid to die. I should point that out. Go to heaven and see my dad and everybody else. And so, I did not want her obviously to die on Christmas week, and I wanted to be there. Those were my prayers. But she did die she actually died really early Christmas Eve morning. I got a phone call actually she died like 1:35 on Christmas Eve. Does that consider Christmas Eve? Christmas Eve morning at 1:35. And we went down. So I was not there when she passed, but I'm figuring there must have been a reason for that. At any rate. So it's a hard journey. I think you prepare for it the best you can. I think it's really kind and understanding if you actually do talk to your parents in advance. So you're really doing what your parents wish, and what they want. Because I would say there was nothing I did that I didn't think my mom would be okay with, or my dad for that
I
matter.
would give you an A plus plus, Kathy. I
Well,
mean,
thank you.
I mean it. And your brothers and your sister-in-laws. I mean, that's just a beautiful story. And you all deserve kudos for what you did. That's that you all worked together. You were all on the same page and you did the best possible thing that you could have
That you
done for
could do.
her.
And I
I,
will say
yeah.
this, if this would help anybody who actually has their parent in their house and it's that difficult, like, you know, I intellectually, when she passed, I knew it was the right thing. But I got to be honest, I just had anguish. The same with my dad. And people would tell me, well, you know, it's the best thing. And I knew it was the best thing for both of them, but I still had so much sorrow. And for about a month after, I just had so much sorrow. But then I felt like I was getting better. And then we were in Austin visiting my daughter, and my dad and I used to sing together. And this guy got up on stage and was singing I'll Fly Away and some of these other songs that I sang with my dad. And I started crying right there in the restaurant, which I was, you know, working to try to get my composure back. But after that, it kind of opened up the floodgates. And it was such a complicated emotion. One was just kind of being an adult orphan, that I don't have either of my parents, and it was really sad. But it was also complicated because I started having flashbacks to some of the things I had to do for my mom that were very hard, you know, cleaning her up and just everything with it. And I found myself just being really, really emotional. And at that same time that that was happening, I got asked about this podcast, which I wanted to do to see if it could help people. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do it without sobbing. So I called my pastor, who I told you was also a licensed counselor. And he came and he walked me through some exercises that tremendously helped. He said, one thing, Kathy, he would ask me specifics. What's really bothering you about what you did for your mom? And I didn't want to say it because it would start making me cry when I thought of it. But he was right. When I would talk about it, he goes, it helps work you through the situation. And then he goes, I want you to write down everything, just stream of consciousness. You write it all down and then you get rid of it. And I burnt mine. And that really did help me try to get through, because every time I thought about it, I would just start sobbing, you know, and it doesn't stop me from missing my parents, but it did really help. So if anybody else is dealing with, like, oh my gosh, when I think back on everything I had to do for my parent, you know, I'm not a caregiver, but I became a caregiver. You know, these weren't things that I knew how to do and I had to learn, you know, kind of concept. So you might have some, you know, bad memories.
But I like what you did. You found someone that could help you process and figure out. And there's, I mean, people need to do that. You need to have someone to talk to and figure out what are the tools that are going to help you cope with this, whether it's reading a book or whether it's talking to a counselor or your pastor. But he sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and it only took one visit because he gave me just those things to do. And he had told me when I called him, he goes, "Oh, Kathy, I deal with this kind of stuff." And he said, "It's not post-traumatic stress. You're not there. That's a whole much more acute thing." He goes, "It's just acute stress." And to help me work through it. And then I would also say, like right after my mom went in the nursing home, my husband and I had gotten a weekend cabin, and we went down there so that we could reconnect, you know, because, you know, that was stressful on the marriage. And then when home instead would be here to try to take walks and try to do things, like I'd go to lunch with friends. Like friends would ask to take me out to dinner or something, like I can do lunch because I have help at lunch. But, you know, trying in the midst of all of that to try to do some self-care and give yourself grace, because you're going to have moments where you're going to be frustrated with doing it. And you're going to feel bad about that. And, you know, but you'll have those, some good moments too, you know.
This is an amazing story. And I mean, I know it's emotional. You were phenomenal. You
Thank
did
you.
not get emotional.
I could not have done that had I not gone through those exercises. I'm telling you, because last week, anytime I started talking about this, I started sobbing. And I'm like, I don't want to do that because then people won't even understand me. So, really doing all the exercises that he gave me. And, you know, his whole thing was to cry. So when I was talking about it or writing about it, I did. And he goes, it will help you get to the other side, you know, and it did.
Will you, as a thank you, we like to make a donation in memory of your mom, just to say thank you for being willing to share your story. So, where do you have an idea of where we could make a donation?
Yes, as I told you, she was a very faithful person, and she went to the Canonsburg United Presbyterian Church in Canonsburg, and it's on Pennsylvania, and it's on Pike Street. And that would be great. That's where she had some donations go from her funeral. And that was another thing too. I also knew all her funeral arrangements and stuff that she wanted to.
That is helpful.
Yeah,
Again, it's a gift to your family. It's
yeah,
uncomfortable. And there's a lot of people that refuse to talk about it, but why would you not?
right,
If you know what you want, or you know the songs that you like, or you know the kind of service that you want, I think that's such a gift to just say, here's what I'd like. I referenced on another episode, I actually bought a book that says, I'm dead. Now what? And inside of it, it has, you can list all your accounts. You can even write your obituary if you'd like. You could say, this is where my funeral plans are. These are the songs I would like to have played at my funeral. And here's the accounts I need you to close. And I just think if it's just a gift, if you can get all of that organized for your family and say, I don't want this to be, I know it's already going to be hard emotionally for you. So
right,
I don't want to make it even harder. If I can help
right,
organize that for you, then that's what I'm going to do. So I got my copy. I'm going to be working on it just because I feel like I'm going to practice what I preach.
right, right. It's very important. We've let all our kids know. We have a spreadsheet of where all of our accounts are, and let them know where all the power of attorneys and our will are. It's just, and like I said, I tell my clients all that too. I said, get all this stuff put somewhere so it's easy for your kids, you know,
And that they know where it is. I think it's
and they
great
know
to
where it
have it, but you
is.
need to know
Yeah,
where it is. Yeah.
right. A lot of
So,
them have given their kids a copy, and they.
well, I can't thank you enough, Kathy. And God bless you and your entire family for what you did. You were tremendous caregivers, absolutely tremendous. And I know that your mom and your dad are smiling down on you.
Well, I hope so. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for doing this podcast. Hopefully, people can watch it and it helps them through the journey a little more.
Thank you. That's a wrap for today's episode of The Care Table. Thank you so much for joining me. If you found this information helpful, would you like, subscribe, write a review, or share this episode with someone that you feel could benefit from hearing this information? I'd sure appreciate it. If you learned of anything during this podcast as far as books, resources, or products that you might think are helpful, be sure to check out the podcast show notes for links to access that information. A friendly reminder that this is not medical or legal advice. This is just information. Consult a professional for your own personal situation. I ask that God would bless you with the wisdom, the courage, and the strength that you need as you're navigating this caregiving journey. And I want to remind you, you are not alone. I appreciate you joining us today. And until next time, stay strong, and I hope to see you at the Care Table.